Jack Stone stared through the observation window of Space Station DR-117, watching the deadly planet below spin slowly like a marble of blues and greens. His new home for the next year looked beautiful from space, but he knew better. The research station's staff had already nicknamed it the hunting grounds, and for good reason. "Mr. Stone, are you sure you want to accept this assignment?" Station Director Reed tapped his tablet screen nervously. "We've lost 3 research teams in the past 2 years. The Shadow Stalkers. They don't leave much behind." Jack turned away from the window, his eyes bright with excitement rather than fear. At 32, he was younger than most xenobiologists stationed here, but his record spoke for itself. 6 years studying dangerous creatures across 12 different planets, and he hadn't lost a single team member. "Director, that's exactly why I requested this posting," Jack said, running a hand through his short brown hair. "Nobody has ever managed to properly study these creatures. We know almost nothing about them." The director's antenna-like head extensions twitched, a sign of anxiety in his species. "The things we do know are bad enough. They hunt in packs. They can turn nearly invisible. Their claws cut through reinforced steel like paper. And worst of all, they're smart. Dangerously smart." Jack nodded, pulling up his own datapad. "But that's what interests me most. Look at these attack patterns." He showed the director a map with red dots marking previous incidents. "These aren't random. There's something deliberate here, something we're missing." "What you're missing, human friend, is survival instinct," came a new voice. Both men turned to see Dr. Blue, the station's head of security, entering the room. Despite her name, her skin was actually a pale green, typical of her species. "I've watched the footage from our security drones. These creatures don't just kill, they plan. They think. They solve problems." "Exactly," Jack said enthusiastically. "Don't you see? That's not normal predator behavior. There's something more going on here." Dr. Blue shook her head, her large eyes blinking sideways. "The last researcher who thought that way ended up as scattered pieces across 3 different valleys. We found his camera drone 2 weeks later. Would you like to see that footage?" "I've already watched it," Jack replied calmly. "Several times. The Shadow Stalker didn't just attack randomly. It disabled his weapons first, then his communications. That shows intelligence. That shows they're a threat that needs to be contained," Dr. Blue countered. "The Galactic Council only allows this research station to remain because we promised to find a way to protect frontier colonies from these monsters." Jack walked back to the window, pressing his hand against the cold glass. 50 years ago, when Earth first joined the Galactic Council, everyone thought humans were too aggressive, too unpredictable to be trusted. Now look at us. We're some of the most respected xenobiologists in the galaxy. Sometimes, you have to look past first impressions. Director Reed sighed heavily, his extensions drooping. "The Council gives us 1 more year. After that, they'll likely approve military action to cleanse the planet. If you want to study these creatures, you have until then to make a breakthrough." "I'll need a research pod," Jack said. "The latest model with enhanced scanning capabilities, and I want to pick my own observation spots, even if they're outside the usual safe zones." "You're either very brave or very foolish," Dr. Blue said, but she was already typing on her tablet. "I'll have the pod ready by morning, but I want you to carry a dead man switch at all times. If your heart stops beating, we blast your entire zone from orbit." "Agreed." Jack nodded. "Agreed. Though I don't think it will come to that." Later that night, alone in his new quarters, Jack reviewed all the previous research data. The holoscreen filled the air with images of the Shadow Stalkers, massive 6-limbed creatures with iridescent black scales that seemed to bend light around them. Their long, serpentine necks ended in wedge-shaped heads with multiple eyes. Previous researchers had classified them as pure killing machines. But as Jack studied the footage again, he noticed something others had missed. In every attack, the creatures had first tried to communicate. through gestures, through displays, through patterns of movement. It was only when the researchers had responded with fear or aggression that the shadow stalkers had struck. "You're not monsters," Jack whispered to the images. "You're trying to tell us something, and I'm going to figure out what it is." Outside his window, the hunting grounds continued its eternal rotation, hiding its secrets in the gathering darkness. Tomorrow, Jack would begin his work. Tomorrow, he would start proving everyone wrong. 3 weeks into his research, Jack's observation pod hung silently above a deep valley. The morning sun cast long shadows through the purple leaf trees below. He had chosen this spot after noticing it was a frequent gathering place for shadow stalkers. Recording day 22, Jack spoke into his log. "They're definitely social creatures. The same group of 6 returns here every 3 days. They're not just hunting, they're meeting." Through his enhanced scanners, he watched as 2 shadow stalkers emerged from the forest below. Their black scales shimmed in the sunlight, partially bending the light around them. Unlike the violent creatures from the warning videos, these moved with grace and purpose. "They're sharing something," Jack noted, zooming in closer. The creatures passed objects between them using their middle limbs, while their front and back legs maintained perfect balance. This isn't random animal behavior. They're trading. Suddenly, his pod's warning system flashed red. "Weather alert. Incoming electrical storm. Automatic return sequence initiated." "No, not now." Jack quickly typed commands into his console. "Override. Maintain position. Override denied. Storm intensity exceeds safety parameters." The pod's engines hummed to life, beginning its return journey. But as it turned, a massive lightning bolt struck its right side. The electrical surge fried the control systems, sending the pod spinning toward the ground. Jack grabbed his emergency harness as alarms blared around him. "Mayday! Mayday! Research Pod Alpha 7 going down in Sector 5. The pod crashed through several trees before slamming into the ground. The impact threw Jack against his restraints, knocking the wind out of him. Warning lights flashed everywhere as smoke filled the cabin. "This is Jack Stone." He coughed into his emergency communicator. "Pod down. Systems critical. Request immediate." He stopped mid-sentence. Through the cracked front viewport, he saw them. 3 shadow stalkers approaching his crashed pod. Their movements were careful, calculated. Jack's hand moved to his emergency beacon, but he hesitated. "They're not attacking," he whispered to himself. "They're investigating." The largest shadow stalker, its scales a deeper black than the others, moved closer to the pod. Its multiple eyes studied the wreckage with obvious intelligence. Then it did something extraordinary. It made a series of complex gestures with its middle limbs. "They're trying to communicate," Jack realized. His heart raced with excitement rather than fear. Going against every safety protocol, he unfastened his harness and moved closer to the viewport. The shadow stalker's head tilted, its eyes focusing directly on him. Jack slowly raised his own hands, mimicking the creature's gestures as best he could. The other shadow stalkers moved closer, their bodies tense but not aggressive. Smoke continued to fill the pod. Jack knew he had minutes at most before he would have to leave his damaged shelter. The emergency teams wouldn't reach him for at least an hour. He had a choice to make. "Trust goes both ways," he muttered, reaching for the pod's door release. The door hissed open, letting in the planet's humid air. Jack stepped out slowly, his hands raised in what he hoped was a peaceful gesture. The shadow stalkers moved back slightly, giving him space. "Hello," Jack said softly. "I'm not here to hurt you." The large shadow stalker moved forward again. Up close, Jack could see intricate patterns in its scales, like living circuitry. It raised its middle limbs again, making more complex gestures. Then, to Jack's amazement, it picked up a piece of his broken pod and set it down carefully in front of him. Not as a threat, but as an offering. "You want to trade?" Jack asked. Slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his personal light. a simple device that created a small, floating ball of light. He set it down next to the pod piece. The shadow stalker picked up the light with incredible gentleness. Its eyes studied the device, and then it made a sound, not a roar or growl, but a series of clicking sounds that almost seemed like language. Jack's communicator crackled. "Stone. Emergency team is en route. Hold tight." But Jack barely heard them. He was too busy watching as the shadow stalker figured out how to activate the light, its movements showing clear understanding and purpose. This wasn't just a predator. This was something far more incredible. "Wait until they see this," Jack grinned, already composing his report in his head. His crash had just turned into the greatest scientific discovery of his career. "You did what?" Director Reed's face had turned a pale shade of yellow, a clear sign of stress in his species. "You got out of the pod, in front of 3 shadow stalkers." Jack sat in the station's medical bay as a robot checked him for injuries. 2 weeks had passed since the crash, and he had finally been cleared to continue his research. But first, he had to face the safety review board. They weren't hostile, Jack explained, trying to keep his excitement under control. They showed clear signs of intelligence. They even tried to communicate. Dr. Blue paced the room, her green skin darker than usual with anger. "The security footage from your pod shows them making threatening displays." "Those weren't threats," Jack insisted. "They were greeting gestures. Look." He pulled up the footage on the room's main screen. "See how they arrange their limbs? It's a pattern. A language. A language that has led to 15 deaths in the past 3 years. Dr. Blue reminded him sharply. But Jack wasn't listening anymore. He was focused on his data pad, reviewing new readings from the valley. The shadow stalkers had returned to the crash site every day since the incident. They were waiting for something. Waiting for him. "I need to go back down," he said firmly. "Absolutely not." Director Reed began, but Jack cut him off. "Look at these energy readings." He showed them his pad. "They're using some kind of technology, advanced technology. Those patterns in their scales, they're not just for show." The room fell silent. Even Dr. Blue stopped pacing. "What kind of technology?" she asked finally. "I don't know yet, but I can find out." Jack stood up, wincing slightly from his remaining bruises. "Give me one more chance. Let me prove I'm right." Hours later, against the strong objections of the security team, Jack's new research pod descended toward the valley. This time, he had a plan. Recording log, day 36, he spoke as he landed the pod in a small clearing. "Breaking protocol today. Bringing trade items to establish communication." He had packed his pod with simple tools, lights, and basic electronic devices. Items that might interest an intelligent species. Items that might help build trust. As if on cue, the large shadow stalker he'd met before emerged from the tree line. Jack had started thinking of it as the leader, though he wasn't sure if that was the right word. "Hello again," Jack said quietly, even though he knew it couldn't hear him through the pod's walls. The creature approached, making those same complex gestures. But this time, Jack noticed something new. Tiny points of light moved through its scales, following the patterns of its movements. "It's not just body language," he realized, quickly adjusting his scanners. "They're using some kind of bioelectronic signals." Feeling braver than ever, Jack opened his pod's small cargo door and placed one of his light devices on the ground. The shadow stalker approached it immediately. But instead of just picking it up like last time, it did something astonishing. The patterns in its scales glowed brighter, and suddenly, the light device floated into the air. "They have control over electromagnetic fields," Jack whispered in awe, his scanners recording everything. "Their whole bodies are like living computers." The shadow stalker set the light down and then, to Jack's amazement, reached into a pouch-like fold in its scales. It pulled out his previous light, the one from 2 weeks ago. But the device had been changed. New patterns had been etched into its surface, matching the ones on the creature's scales. They didn't just study it, Jack realized. They improved it. His excitement was interrupted by a harsh voice over his radio. "Stone, you are in violation of safety protocols. Return to the station immediately." Jack looked at his new friend, then at his radio. He made his decision. "Sorry, Dr. Blue," he said, switching off his communications. "This is too important." The shadow stalker made its clicking sounds again, and this time Jack was sure. It wasn't random noise. It was trying to teach him something. Understanding their technology might be impressive, but understanding their language, that would change everything. "Okay," he said, reaching for more trade items. "Let's really talk." Above him, the station's sensors would be recording his every move, probably setting off dozens of alarms. But Jack didn't care. He was about to make the breakthrough of the century, and no amount of protocols would stop him now. A month had passed since Jack started his secret meetings. His research pod now carried deep scratches in its paint, not from attacks, but from the shadow stalker's careful attempts to show him how their technology worked. "I think I'll call you Ghost," Jack said through his pod's external speakers. He had finally installed them, breaking yet another station rule about interacting with the planet's wildlife, since you can practically disappear when you want to. Ghost, the large shadow stalker with the intricate scale patterns, made a series of clicking sounds that Jack was slowly learning to understand. The creature's scales lit up in a pattern that Jack now recognized as agreement. "Stone." Dr. Blue's voice crackled through his emergency channel, the only one he couldn't turn off. "Your pod is transmitting strange energy readings. What are you doing down there?" Jack smiled as he watched Ghost demonstrate how to manipulate magnetic fields. "Just conducting some advanced research, Doctor. Everything's fine. We're picking up multiple shadow stalker signatures around you. Return to base immediately." "Those are Ghost's family members," Jack replied calmly. "They're teaching me about their society." A new voice cut in. Director Reed. "You're... what? Did you name one of them?" Jack watched as Ghost used its bioelectronic fields to lift several metal objects in a complex dance. 3 younger shadow stalkers nearby copied the movements, clearly learning from the elder. "They're not just intelligent," Jack explained, "recording everything. They have a complete civilization. They pass knowledge down through generations. Look at this." He transmitted video of Ghost teaching the younger ones. On the screen, patterns of light flowed through their scales in matching sequences. One of the young ones dropped its metal piece, and Ghost quickly caught it with a magnetic field. "This is incredible," Jack continued. "They're not using tools like we do. Their bodies are their technology. Those scale patterns, they're like living circuit boards." "Stone, you've lost your mind," Dr. Blue snapped. "This is a violation of every safety protocol we have. I'm sending security pods to bring you back." But Jack barely heard her. Ghost had approached his pod, making the greeting gesture they now shared. Then, the shadow stalker did something new. It pressed one of its middle limbs against the pod's viewport, and suddenly, Jack's data pad lit up with new information. They're transferring data directly to my systems," Jack exclaimed. "Their biotechnology can interface with our computers." Through his viewport, Jack watched in amazement as complex equations and diagrams flowed across his screen. The shadow stalkers weren't just surviving on this planet. They were its original inhabitants, an advanced civilization that had chosen to live in harmony with nature rather than build cities. "Director," Jack said urgently, "you need to see this. They're not animals. They're not even just intelligent beings. They're engineers, scientists. They've mastered technologies we've never even dreamed of." A loud alarm suddenly blared through his pod. Security vessels were entering the atmosphere. Ghost and the other shadow stalkers looked up, their scales shifting to darker patterns that Jack now knew meant concern. "No, wait," Jack called over the radio. "You don't understand what you're about to destroy." There. Ghost moved with incredible speed, Before Jack could finish his sentence, the Shadow Stalker had used its electromagnetic abilities to lift his entire pod off the ground, carrying it to safety as security vessels fired warning shots into the valley. Amazing, Jack whispered as Ghost gently set the pod down in a hidden cave. You're protecting me. The Shadow Stalker made the clicking sound that Jack had learned meant agreement. Then, to his surprise, Ghost began transferring more data to his pad, not just technical information, but images, history, culture. You want me to understand, Jack realized. To tell your story. Ghost scales lit up in the pattern for yes. In the distance, security vessels continued their search. Jack knew he had minutes at most before they found him. But now he had proof. Proof that would change everything. The Shadow Stalkers weren't monsters. They were perhaps the most advanced species humanity had ever encountered. Don't worry, Jack said to Ghost, quickly backing up all the new data. I won't let them hurt you, I promise. Above them, the cave entrance glowed with the lights of approaching security vessels. Jack knew the real fight was just beginning. Not a fight with claws and weapons, but a fight for understanding. And this time, he had science on his side. Jack sat in the station's holding cell, his datapad confiscated. Through the reinforced window, he could see a massive military ship had docked with the research station. Its black hull was marked with the Galactic Council's symbol, the Council's peacekeeping force. Director Reed said, entering the cell, "They arrived an hour ago. Dr. Blue has shown them your footage." Then they must understand. Jack stood up quickly. The Shadow Stalkers are an advanced civilization. We can't let. They've authorized immediate planetary cleansing. The director cut him off, his antenna drooping. They're calling it a threat to galactic security. Jack felt his blood run cold. Cleansing. They can't. There are families down there, children learning their technology. Ghost's whole clan. The cell door opened again. A tall figure in a black uniform entered. Commander Ward of the Peacekeeping Force. His cybernetic eye scanned Jack briefly. Mr. Stone, the commander's voice was emotionless. Your footage shows these creatures have mastered bioelectronic technology far beyond our understanding. Technology they've used to kill researchers. Only in self-defense. Jack protested. They were trying to communicate, to teach us. Look at the data they shared with me. Their civilization is too dangerous to exist. Commander Ward finished. Bioelectronic weapons that can interface with any technology. Living computers that can hack our systems. The Council has seen enough. Through the window, Jack watched as more military ships emerged from hyperspace. Their weapons could turn the entire planet into ash within hours. Please, Jack tried again. Ghost saved my life. They're peaceful unless threatened. We could learn so much from them. Ghost. Commander Ward's cybernetic eye flashed. You named one of them. The same one that interfered with our security vessels, Dr. Blue added, entering the cell. It used some kind of electromagnetic pulse to protect Stone's pod. Jack saw his chance. Exactly. They could have killed me 100 times. Instead, they chose to teach me, to protect me. Does that sound like mindless killers? Commander Ward studied the footage playing on the cell's screen. Ghost lifting Jack's pod to safety, the young ones learning to manipulate magnetic fields, the complex data transfers. The Council's decision is final, he said finally. We begin cleansing operations at dawn. But as the commander turned to leave, Jack played his last card. The data they gave me, he said quickly. It's not just technical specifications. It's their history. This is their homeworld. They didn't invade it. They evolved here. They chose to live in harmony with nature instead of building cities. Their technology is part of them, part of this world's natural development. The commander paused. Even Dr. Blue looked uncertain. If you destroy them, Jack continued, you're not eliminating a threat. You're committing genocide against an indigenous species, against children who are just learning their own culture. Director Reed's antenna twitched. Commander, perhaps we should. A loud alarm cut through the air. Dr. Blue rushed to a console. Multiple shadow stalkers approaching the station. She shouted. They're floating in space. Jack jumped up. Let me talk to them. It must be Ghost. They're trying to. Weapons free. Commander Ward barked into his comm. Target those creatures. No. Jack slammed his hand on the cell's control panel. Years of xenobiology work had taught him every standard override code. The door slid open. He ran to the nearest viewport. Outside, Ghost and several other shadow stalkers hovered in space, their scales glowing with complex patterns. They weren't attacking. They were displaying something, projecting massive holograms into space around them. Look, Jack pointed. Those are their star maps, their historical records. They're trying to prove what I said. Commander Ward raised his hand, stopping his gunners. The holograms showed centuries of shadow stalker history. Their evolution, their choice to preserve their world, their attempts to communicate with other species. They're not hiding anymore, Jack said softly. They're revealing everything, risking everything to prevent a war. That's not the action of monsters. That's wisdom, intelligence, compassion. The commander's cybernetic eye scanned the holograms, recording everything. In the silence that followed, the fate of an entire species hung in the balance. The station's main observation deck was crowded with military officers, scientists, and council representatives who had arrived through emergency teleporters. All of them watched in silence as Ghost and 5 other shadow stalkers continued their demonstration in space. Remarkable. The council's chief scientist, an elderly being with crystalline skin, studied the holographic displays. Their bodies generate quantum-level computing processes. Each scale is like a living computer chip. Jack stood between Ghost and the gathered officials. His friend had finally been allowed to enter the station, though 20 weapons remained trained on the Shadow Stalker. Show them the language database, Jack suggested to Ghost. The creature's scales rippled with light, and new holograms filled the air. Complex patterns of light and sound formed into understandable words and concepts. A complete translation matrix, the chief scientist gasped. They've been studying us all along, learning how to communicate. Ghost made a series of clicks and pulses. Thanks to the translation matrix, everyone heard the words in their own language. We are the guardians of this world. We have watched many species reach for the stars. Some came in peace, others did not. We judged each by their actions, not their appearances. Commander Ward's cybernetic eye whirred as it processed the data. The missing research teams, the attacks. You were testing us. Every species that found us had a choice. Ghost's translation continued. Those who sought to capture us, to steal our technology, to destroy our world, they faced our judgment. Those who showed wisdom, patience, understanding, they earned our knowledge. Jack smiled. That's why you trusted me after the crash. I tried to communicate instead of running or fighting. Ghost's scales glowed with approval. The Shadow Stalker moved closer to Jack, causing several soldiers to raise their weapons. But Ghost simply extended a limb, touching the nearby computer console. Instantly, the station's screens filled with new information. By the stars, the chief scientist moved closer to the screens. Medical technology beyond anything we've imagined. Clean energy systems that could power entire worlds. Environmental restoration techniques that could save dying planets. We offer this freely. Ghost's translation echoed through the room. Knowledge earned through trust, not taken by force. Commander Ward finally lowered his weapon. Why reveal everything now? You could have stayed hidden, protected your secrets. Because of him, Ghost turned to Jack. He showed us that humans, despite their young age among the stars, understand something many ancient races forgot. The power of friendship over fear, of understanding over conquest. The council representatives huddled together, speaking in urgent whispers. Jack held his breath. Everything depended on what they decided next. The chief scientist stepped forward. In light of this evidence, I am officially recognizing the Shadow Stalkers, the Guardians, as an advanced civilization with full rights under Council law. Their world is hereby declared a protected sanctuary. A cheer went up from the station's scientific staff. Dr. Blue shook her head in amazement, while Director Reed's antenna wiggled with excitement. Furthermore, the scientist continued, we request the Guardians consider sharing their knowledge with the Council. Under their own terms, of course. Ghost scales rippled with patterns that Jack now recognized as amusement. We will share with those who prove themselves worthy, as we always have. Starting with the humans. Why us? Commander Ward asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Because Ghost's translation came through. In all our history, only a human looked at the galaxy's most feared predator and saw a potential friend. That is a wisdom we wish to understand. Jack felt pride swell in his chest, not just for himself, but for all humanity. We may be new to the stars, he said, but we know that the strongest bonds often come from the most unlikely friendships. Ghost's scales lit up in agreement. Around them, soldiers lowered their weapons, scientists prepared their data recorders, and council members began drafting new treaties. Thank you, Jack said quietly to his friend, for not giving up on us. Ghost's response didn't need translation. The gentle pulse of lights through its scales spoke of friendship, trust, and hope for the future. Above them, the military ships began powering down their weapons. A new chapter in galactic history was about to begin, all because one human chose to reach out in friendship instead of striking out in fear. 6 months after the historic first contact, the research station had transformed. Where once there were warning signs about deadly predators, now there were classrooms filled with scientists from across the galaxy, all learning from the Guardians. Jack walked through the station's new bioelectronic lab, where Ghost was teaching a group of wide-eyed researchers. The Shadow Stalker's scales rippled with patterns of light as it demonstrated how to merge organic and electronic systems. The key is not to force the connection, Ghost's translator explained, but to let it grow naturally, like a friendship. Several humans in the group smiled at this. In the months since the Guardians had been recognized by the Council, they had shown a particular fondness for human metaphors and ways of thinking. Ambassador Stone, a young researcher, called out as Jack passed, "Is it true you're leading the first joint exploration mission?" Jack nodded, still not quite used to his new title. "We leave tomorrow. 3 human ships and 3 Guardian teams, exploring the unknown regions together." The news spread excitement through the room. Even Dr. Blue, who now served as the station's lead researcher, looked up from her work with pride. From wanting to kill each other to exploring space together, she mused. All in half a year, humans do have a way of changing things to obey. Ghost floated over to join them, its scales showing patterns that Jack now recognized as laughter. "Humans rush in where angels fear to tread," the Guardian quoted, having become fond of Earth literature. But sometimes that is exactly what the galaxy needs. The station's main door opened, and Director Reed hurried in, his antenna twitching with excitement. The Council's annual report just came in. The Guardian Human Friendship Initiative has been voted the most successful first contact program in the last 1,000 years. And to think, Dr. Blue added, we nearly destroyed all this. Ghost's scales dimmed slightly at the memory, but brightened again as it turned to Jack. The past is past. Now we look to the future. Are you ready for tomorrow's launch? Jack pulled out his data pad, showing the mission plans. 3 Guardian vessels, organic ships that looked like giant manta rays, would join 3 human exploration cruisers. Their mission, to find other misunderstood species and bridge new gaps of understanding. The ships are ready, Jack confirmed. Though I still can't believe how fast your engineers helped upgrade our vessels. Bioelectronic navigation systems, living computers. That was the easy part, Ghost's translator hummed. Teaching your engineers to stop trying to control everything and start working with natural systems. That took patience. Speaking of patience, Director Reed interrupted. The new batch of human students has arrived. Ghost, would you mind showing them the basics? The Guardian's scales lit up with joy. Teaching had become one of their greatest pleasures, especially teaching humans. There was something about humanity's mix of curiosity, innovation, and ability to make friends with anything that fascinated them. I remember when you were terrified of us. Ghost told Jack as they watched the new students file in. Now look, humans and Guardians working together, learning from each other. Jack smiled. Well, you were pretty scary at first. Still are, when you want to be. Fear is sometimes necessary, Ghost agreed, its scales showing complex patterns. But friendship is always stronger. That's what humans taught us. We protected knowledge through fear for millennia. You showed us a better way. The station's lights dimmed slightly as a massive organic ship glided past the main viewport, their flagship for tomorrow's mission. Its living hull pulsed with patterns of light that matched Ghost's scales. Ready to make more friends out there? Jack asked. Ghost's translator crackled with amusement. Ready to show the galaxy that the most dangerous predator and the most adaptable species make an unstoppable team. As they watched the stars together, Jack reflected on how much had changed. The Guardians had shared technology beyond imagination, but humanity had shared something just as valuable, the courage to reach out in friendship, even in the face of fear. Tomorrow they would launch, human and Guardian ships flying together into the unknown. But whatever they found out there, they would face it the same way they had faced each other, with open minds, brave hearts, and the unshakable belief that understanding was always possible, no matter how dangerous things seemed at first. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly what both species were counting on.